More light, reading as writers. I apologize for a little bit of a late start. I'm gonna confess, and I guess you can see there's some evidence on my body. I have poison sumac, and I've been uh, trying to treat that before I sat down with y'all, so I wasn't just scratching wildly. Um, anyway, welcome back. Like uh, like usual, we're going to open with um, a writing prompt, a free write, and then get into the conversation. So I have, again, I'm pulling up the Bernadette Myers writing experiments, putting that in the comments. That's what was taking me a second. Um, as for, since I'm going to try and keep it a little bit on theme, um, reading as writers, I think that this would be a good opportunity to write into journal or fiction or essay or poetry, write into a book that was influential on you as a writer. So for me, I've got a stack back here that I'll show you in a little while. Um, I might write in the voice of a narrator I really like, or I might write a letter to an author that has meant a lot to me. If that's too hard, too much pressure, um, the uh, the other thing that I would go for, and this one is on that Bernadette Meyer um, experiments list, it's in the section of journals. I would say daily changes on the body and its parts. And the reason that one is relevant to me is because my body is feeling some changes from that poison sumac. All right, I'm gonna put 5 minutes on the timer. Please go ahead and start that free write. I'll be doing it with you. I have to set the timer. For anyone just joining, we're doing a free write right now. So it's about a minute and a half left of that. I gave the prompts writing into an author that was, or writing to an author that was super influential on your style, or writing in the voice of your favorite book, poem. And if that was too much pressure, then the other option was the body and its changes, which is in response to my this rash you see all over me. Got about 45 seconds left. Okay, if that wasn't enough time for you, you're really in the zone with your journal or free write. Totally keep going. I'm going to share what I did in my free write because shockingly, it was what I wanted to talk about anyway. So reading as a writer is different from reading for entertainment or just reading as a reader. And so the book I can't get out of my head when I think about things like this, and the book that I wrote on was the book Adverbs by Daniel Handler. This is actually going a little bit out of order from what my plan was, but it's fine. This is the book Adverbs, Daniel Handler. And I don't know, you can see it's pretty beat up. It says on the back that it's a novel. It says this novel is about love. I would characterize it more as a short story anthology in which, because it's pretty confusing, there are repeated character names throughout the book, but they are not the same character, which is super confusing. So I actually wrote this in my little journal. This book liberated me as a writer while it confounded me as a reader. Daniel Handler, he's also Lemony Snicket, so he publishes under a couple of names. Daniel Handler has a crazy style, and I think at some point in his life he realized like there are no rules. Like I make up the rules for my own writing, and that's a really, I mean, that was a paradigm shift for me. That was world changing, especially as a writer. As a reader, it was really confusing because so many of the characters have the same names, and I thought that it was like one narrative arc. I thought it might be like, what is it called? Those, ensemble. I thought it would be like an ensemble movie where at the end everybody's like, it's one story. It's not. But something that he does that really blew my mind and made me change the way I think about being a writer, the way I think about writing is he inserts himself, Daniel Handler, presumably, he inserts the first person narrator in many of these stories that are in third person. And you're like, okay, that's new. Vonnegut does that, which I really get a kick out of because you think you're reading this third person omniscient, and then suddenly it's like, and I was sitting down the street watching them from afar. Which, I mean, you can't just do that. It has its moments, and I think reading writers who do that will teach you how to do that, how to do it well, how to do it effectively. And you have to think about what's the purpose of that. Like, why are you reading or writing this third person omniscient story, and then you have a first person there. When Vonnegut does it, it is usually something that is his real life. Like in Slaughterhouse-Five, right? He's saying, he's telling this World War II story in some parts of it. So if you haven't read it, there's a lot going on in that book. And then he scoots aside from the Billy Pilgrim story, third person, and says, this is my experience as the narrator, first person. I was sitting in that train car or whatever. I haven't read Slaughterhouse-Five in a long time. And then in his book, this is Vonnegut still, Breakfast of Champions, he says he wrote the book as a 50th birthday present to himself. And then when the book reaches what he calls its spiritual climax, he says, I didn't expect this to happen. He pulls you out. It's meta, I guess, is the word for it. He pulls the audience back out of the story that's going on, and he says, this is the spiritual climax of the book. I didn't know this was going to happen next, and it changed my life. And that's very, very effective. That's one of my favorite scenes in any book ever. I got a tattoo about it. Daniel Handler does that, but he also does lots of other things where that really, like I said, it's really confusing as a reader, but it's really liberating as a writer, where you're going along in third person and then suddenly it's first person, same story, or he'll be doing a really traditional, like, not at all surprising style of writing, and then suddenly there'll be no more punctuation, and you have to. This is why I've read this book a couple of times. It's totally unclear, adverbs. It's totally unclear at points, like, whose story it is. And that's kind of the point of this book. It's love stories, and it discusses, not overtly, but all the different kinds of love that exist in the world. And in doing that, there are different kinds of people, different kinds of thinking, different kinds of heart around love. And beyond that, he just has this deftness of prose. I'm just sort of flipping through to see where I've underlined, but it's like every page. And this actually is more along the lines of what I wanted to talk about. When I am reading as a writer, also just in general, it's a habit I've picked up. I always have a pen next to me. And depending what kind of thing I'm reading, I use different symbols. I almost always, every book I read, I'll underline and bracket and like round parentheses things, or I'll write a line next to the paragraph. This one here, you can see there's a bracket, an underline, and the underline is within the bracket. So if it's fiction or poetry, something that I'm really reading for the language, not for the information, or for the story, not for the information, the underlines are usually the most beautiful sections of writing, and then the brackets are something I want to remember, or a cool piece of information, or just slightly less beautiful writing. So this, and I just turned to this page randomly, because, like I said, tons of this book. Here's some brackets there. Here's some underline. I turned to this page randomly. I stuck my finger in the other one that was heavily underlined. And what I've bracketed here is, love is keeping that symbolic focus, each kiss crucial, each step a landmark. I could have read down a list of every important landmark in America and told you what they all stood for symbolically, what it meant if they were to be destroyed. I knew what everything meant, and soon everyone else would know too. I just needed to finish it up. I needed to give Adam a name, a nudge, and nudge all the details into place. So the part I underlined, I think, is something that really resonated with me, and I was like, yeah. Love is keeping that symbolic focus, each kiss crucial, each step a landmark. And I definitely have stolen this style, the style of that sentence, since reading this book, which is turning a regular sentence into a list. I think that's a really, really cool, really important, to me it's an important style, but it's cool to do it without using ands, without using conjunctions, without starting a new sentence. Just, I'm going to list the 6 relevant items and be done with it. That's in my bio, I say that I like long sentences, and that is just exactly the heart of it for me. Moments like that. Here's just another random page. underlined. He looked at her, and there it was, the panic of screwing up heaven and earth if you say the wrong thing and seal the envelope. Someone can break your heart, leave you dead on the lawn, and still you never learn what to say to stop it all over again. That one I think I just underlined because it's beautiful language. I think it's also true, but that's not really for me to determine or why I'm here telling you these things. Um, there's an important element, I think, in most literature of most, not all, literature of universality, right? And I think that sentence is something everyone can agree with, and he said it so succinctly and so well, and that's something that I find worth underlining. So that's one of my all-time favorite books, both for my experience of it and also as a writer. It really, really changed how I look at what I'm allowed to do in writing. And the truth of that is there are no rules for how you tell your own story or write what you're writing. Of course, you know, when you're going into a genre or style that is established and you want to fit into that mold, you know, you have to follow some rules there. But I'm less into that. But I do think it's a little bit like, you know, you have to learn the basics before you explore, because when you explore, you're taking what you know and expanding. Like, you know, you have to do a realistic still life before you become Picasso, right? Same, I think, applies to writing. Now then, a lot of, I've got notes here, a lot of reading as a writer is about stealing. And I know that as writers we talk about that pretty often. Like you want to steal from other writers who are doing it well. But I also think that in the act of hoping to steal, in the act of finding something you really love that you want to emulate, that's where the learning happens, learning to be a better writer and to be a better reader. For me, that's usually stylistic. Like I started writing long sentences as though they were lists, like Daniel Handler, after reading Daniel Handler. He and Vonnegut have other things in common besides inserting the first person into third person, such as you'll be reading something that's maybe dramatic or you think it's very serious, and then there's a really weird moment of humor. I have no idea how to do that, but it is why I keep reading those books, so that I can figure out, you know, what it is in there that does it. I couldn't find the book I most wanted to share. I think I lent it out, which would be terrible because then I don't have it. It's Civil War Land in Bad Decline by George Saunders. That's a short story anthology, and I, even just in the first story, or maybe not the first story, but the first one I read, which was Offloading from Mrs. Schwartz, I underlined and highlighted. This was before I even wrote in books, so it was like a very, very important moment for me as a reader and as a writer. The whole thing, I couldn't tell how he did what he did. And it's really messy if you go and look at that book of mine, because I didn't have a system yet. It wasn't intuitive to me writing in books. And it's underlined and highlighted in different colors. I don't even own a highlighter anymore. But what he does that I think I've determined is so powerful, particularly in that story, is he uses really, really short words before to break up the cadence of the story or of the sentence. So he uses a bunch of really, really short words, and then at the end of the sentence, they're long words. It's a little bit, it's hard to read. It's hard to, I wish I had it in front of me so I could really dive into it. But it sort of, this is probably a terrible analogy, it sort of reminds me of Latin, where all the verbs are at the end and you like don't know what you're waiting for. I can't read Latin, but I know that about it. So you get through a bunch of your sentence, and then you find the action. That's Latin, not George Saunders. And it's really something that you can steal from, take away from, if you can dissect it. Like I said, that's style. That's not close reading. That's not subtext. I am not great at writing subtext. However, this leads me into one of the things that I wanted to share. I want to recommend some reading on writing and reading as a writer. So, Charles Baxter, The Art of Subtext. I actually have 2 copies of this book. One is my spouse's. Helps you figure out how to create subtext and how to find subtext. Fantastic. I guess the subtitle is Beyond Plot. Another book I wanted to talk about. Another one I don't have here is The Truth About Stories by Thomas King. I know I lent that one out. He's one of my all-time favorite writers. The longer quote that the title is taken from is The Truth About Stories is That's All We Are. And it's a book on craft, but it's also a memoir, which is one of my favorite combinations because you get the personal in there, keeps you in. And he talks about, how he has experienced life as a native man, as an artist, and also trying to be a great artist. Highly recommend that one. Then there's Toni Morrison, who, you can do no wrong reading Toni Morrison, Playing in the Dark. The subtitle is Whiteness and the Literary Imagination. It's along the same lines, a little bit memoir, a little bit craft, and so beautifully written. Yeah, I even underlined in the preface. That's amazing. I'm going to read it to you since I'm already looking at it. Cardinal's project was not fictional, however. It was to document her madness, her therapy, and the complicated process of healing in language as exact and as evocative as possible in order to make both her experience and her understanding of it accessible to a stranger. I think that's a lot of my goal as a writer. I'm going to have to reread that book. I think that sentence really got to me, since that's clearly what I was hoping to talk on today. Yeah, really, really kick-ass. Pardon my French. I also don't have a copy with me of Triggering Towns. My spouse owns it, and shout out to Chuy Renteria. He brought it up in in a class I took recently with Iowa City Poetry, one of the free generative writing workshops, and I had entirely forgotten about that book because I know when I discovered it, I thought it was a book of poetry because it's by Richard Hugo, a poet, and it's not. It's about how to be a better writer, so recommend that one. And then for times when, you're getting down on yourself and you want to read something and take something away on how to be a better artist, I pulled out this. You can get this online for free, but I own it in a physical form. It's a Neil Gaiman's Make Good Art speech. That's a little bit of inspiration for how to continue to exist in this world as an artist. And there's some good takeaways in the language of that one too. I'm trying to not keep so hard in the fiction department, but that is where I learn most personally about style and stealing from other artists. Obviously, if you're a poet, that's going to be more in poetry, and I have a poetry book now to show you, which is cool. I have don't know what's behind me, the broadside from it, Instead of Dying, by Lauren Haldeman, who is an amazing human being, an Iowa local, and has taught at the David R. Collins Writers Conference. She's also a comic poet. She writes poetry in comic form and more traditionally. Reading this book also changed how I thought about writing, both poetry and prose. I think that they're interchangeable in a lot of ways. I don't see myself as a poet, but I steal a lot from poetry in my prose. So this is broken up in sections by number, 1 through 7. And something that just slayed me, I didn't write in this one, I just circled the page numbers because I didn't know even how to do it. So she has a whole section here where it's numbered lists. I think there's like 8 of them, and they're I mean, you can tell they're mirror images of each other, more or less. And in the first one, she tells some kind of story, and in the second one, she tells a very similar story, but each line is the same words and they're all mixed up. I don't think I can do her much credit by reading this, and because they're numbered lists, I'm not sure if reading it is the most effective way. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to read the numbers or not. Right? This is why going to readings is so great. But I'm gonna read a couple of the lines. I'm going to read the numbers. I can't tell you if that's the right way to do it. So I'm just going to read a few lines and then I'm going to switch over to the second poem. So the first one is, days I accepted the bed, 1, as a cold anchor, 2. Days I accept the moving, 3, fur of the room, 4. Days full of filth, 5, accepted, days of gunk. Days like 6, holding the Google, 7, street maps figure. I can't tell if I just cut out, so we're going to hold tight for a minute. I think we're still going. I'm trying to watch. I've got me on my other monitor. All right, well, I'm going to keep going, and maybe you can see me, maybe you can't. If anybody's out there in the watching, please leave me a comment. Let me know if we're still here. Looks like we are. Okay. Anyway, so the first line of this poem is, days I accept the bed as a cold anchor. And then you go to the second poem, or the mirror page, and it says, I bed the accepting these days, anchored cold as a moving acceptance. And each of these poems has its own story, its own I am God. All right, I'm glad that you guys can still hear me. Each poem has its own the word is not story. Movement. It has its own movement separately, and the way they work together just blows my mind. First, I never would have considered doing a list like this where the numbered items are the sentences are broken up amongst the numbered items. I see lists and I think that and I think of, you know, item 1, complete sentence or paragraph or whatever, item 2, complete on its own, and she doesn't do that. She just breaks down the sentences and then adds the, I don't know which order she did it in, but the sentences are broken up within the numbers, and I think that's really cool. But also she manages to use the same words to tell a totally different story, and it's almost line by line the same words. Really, really incredible, and worth reading to learn from. I've pulled out a few books here that I've just written all over, and my thinking is that I would share what I learned from those. I'm gonna probably cut a bit out. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 books here. We're not going to go through them all, but I will highlight some of them. The Things We Carried, Tim O'Brien, more or less a classic. It's, I think it's listed as fiction. It feels like memoir. It's about the narrator's time in Vietnam, and this is not the copy that I first read, so this is the second copy. I gave away my first copy and bought myself a second, so you can't see where I've underlined anything. But highly recommend it as a sort of format changer. His language is beautiful, of course, but the formatting of this book, the physical storytelling, the way things look on the page, and the way he uses words it was my first time encountering anything like it when I read it, and I read it in my last year of college, so I felt like I knew how to read. I want to talk a bit about close reading, but I don't think that today is the day for that, but it is something I think that the more you read as a writer, the easier it becomes. Seeing really getting into the nitty-gritty and seeing how word choice matters. That does also play into subtext for another time. Another book that was early in my world of writing and books is Demons in the Spring by Joe Meno. He is a professor at Columbia College Chicago, but he was my professor and introduced me to Barry Hannah and George Saunders and several other really amazing short story authors. It was a short story class, but he himself is a short story author, and story by story, even just the physical, this book is illustrated, it's amazing, but story by story, even the way that the physical layout, the way he puts the words on the page looks different. So I think this is dialogue here where it says, or it's got those lines. Yeah, it is. You can see here, I can't tell what you can see, but you can see that there's like M dashes before any of the dialogue, and it doesn't even say who's speaking. It occasionally says who's speaking. And then this is a lot of, he does the long sentence thing that I really love, but a lot of it is the way he words things so that they are musical and poetic while simultaneously saying a universal, right? That's always, I think, that's often a goal. This is one of my favorite stories in here. It's in second person, and it's called What a Schoolgirl You Are. I think on his website you can find him reading it. He has a really, really, really beautiful cadence, and honestly, it's an honor to hear him read and to be able to read in his voice. Highly recommend checking him out and hearing him read or watching him read. But this sentence blew my mind and changed a lot of how I write. So here it is. This prolonged heartache, this living day to day, it is these moments, these deep, deep, howling moments, these upturned dark and woeful moments, these clawing, coffin-shaped moments, these nail through the palm of your hand moments, these every breath you take is full of baby spiders moments. It is these moments that are by far much more frightening. There's context there, so you know what it's more frightening than. Yeah, he is so skillful, right? He changes the length of the words he uses and the way he puts them together. It's a very long list of. He uses nouns as adjectives, which is something I really love. And I think we've all had those moments. And also, like, every breath you take is full of baby spiders. When I read that, did you not feel like tiny baby spiders in your throat? That one is so upsetting. But obviously in a good way. Also, he's one of the few writers of second person. He doesn't often write second person, but he's one of the few writers of second person that I can really, really get behind. He really, really knows what he's doing when he does it. One of my very favorite stories in here, I'm not going to read from, but I'm going to show you if you can see. I've underlined so much of it. It's called I Want the Quiet Moments of a Party Girl. And since you already saw some of that, this book is illustrated. Some of the most beautiful art to go along with it. So there's a ton to steal from Joe Meno. My recommendation in starting out as someone who is trying to read as a writer, trying to figure out what to steal, is underline or bracket whatever feels less icky to you. I know it's kind of weird starting out when you've never written in a book before. Your very favorite lines, and then you can move in and interrogate them. Like I said, just staring at that George Saunders short story, Offloading for Mrs. Schwartz, helped me figure out, like, he's using tons and tons of short little tiny words, and then the end of the sentence has long words. And it forces you as a reader to change the pace you're reading in. And, you know, the way we can figure that out is by writing in our books. Something I wanted to also show, I am personally into art as a way of seeing the world, a way of a lens through which to see the world, and also a motivator for social change or life change. And so something that I refer to a lot is this book of speeches. It's from Borders in like 1998. I think I stole it from my father. I think I bought it for him for Christmas because I didn't know what to give him. Um, but they're not all by people we like, but they're all very good speeches. And if you're writing for 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 reading out loud, if you're writing to be heard, which I think is most of, even if you're not into reading out loud or reading in front of an audience, when people are reading something, they're hearing your words. So by looking at speeches, you can really see how effective the writing of it is. I took a writing class in college that one of the first assignments, the professor had us read not the Declaration of Independence, the Emancipation Proclamation, and it's super short. I'm sure you know. I'm sure you've read it at some point. But then we had to sit down, and it was kind of terrible. It's like a 2-hour class, and he was like, "Tell me why this is good writing," and he didn't help us out at all. And that's very similar to what I said about Saunders. The size of the words, the pacing, where the commas are, where the periods are, makes a huge, huge difference. So it's really weird to look at speeches, I think, as a form of literature if you've never heard of that before. But that exercise with the Emancipation Proclamation was also mind blowing for me, and is the reason I may or may not have stolen this book from my father. Because actually, the title is Speeches That Changed the World. They really did. They were given in moments that they were given in important moments, and they made an impact on the world around them. And that's through language, right? It's not necessarily that the pen is, I mean, the pen is mightier than the sword, but it's not necessarily that. It's how the pen can motivate the sword or influence the sword, right? To lay it down or to pick it up. Another thing I have here, I almost grabbed this before I grabbed the speeches book, but it leads very easily into it, is the book Strength to Love by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Again, it's sermons, I believe. I go back to this book a lot. I mean, you can probably see there's a piece of paper in it, and it's a little torn up. The binding is coming loose. But these speeches or sermons, sorry, some of it is essay, but a lot of it is the sermons he gave. You can see, he's quoting the Bible in here a few times, and I'm not particularly a religious person, but I would also say that there's some good poetry in there too. He uses his sermons to motivate social change, and he can't do that without being good at writing, or at least good at language. Maybe you're a good orator. I am not a great orator without words in front of me anyway. So I highly recommend reading this as a writer. I mean, a lot of it, the purpose of the book is I've got some bus passes in here. The purpose of these are to motivate people or to help people feel at peace, whatever. But each of these essays or sermons in this book were written for a purpose and for an audience, and they were effective, and they're still effective, right? I mean, he is long dead, but we're still reading this, and I'm still getting things from it. I have underlined and starred and bracketed tons of this book, and it's not an easy read. I should warn you at that. You can certainly find recordings of it if you're an audio person. I am not, but because it's a hard read, it might be really good, even for me, to listen along while reading. I've never tried it. I wish I had thought of it before this moment. So it's not an easy read, but the things he says are universal and important, and from that you can find, you can steal from it. You can say, what is effective about this sentence? Why does it make me feel motivated for peace, or motivated to march, or whatever. Yeah, I've written all over it. There were moments when, for me, it was a little churchy. I'm, like I said, not particularly religious, but that is the audience, right? He was giving these sermons to his parish, and hoping to give them hope, hoping to motivate them in a time of total darkness. And it was effective. You know, he is a pioneer of a movement. So that's that. Then I've got two more maybe that I'll share with you, maybe fewer than two. I'll just show you maybe the covers and how beat up they are. This is Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. This is Greengrass Running Water by, which is Thomas King. Thomas King also wrote the book I talked about earlier, The Truth About Stories. This book, actually both of them are full of subtext and metaphor, and not... Invisible Man is one of the hardest books to read, that is like a 5-star, keep on me at all times, never let anyone see it book. And it's so hard to read, but everything about it, it teaches you about history, yes, because Invisible Man is about racism, but it definitely informed how I write. And I mean, you can tell there's so many bookmarks in it, but you know, every page there's something, right? His narrative style is way different than these others. He uses long sentences, he uses long words, and tons of it, it needs to be close read. It's not begging you to close read, but there's so much going on in every sentence of that book, that I'm sure there are full classes on just reading that book, and learning from that book as a writer, as a reader, as a human being who lives in a world where race exists. Something really special about Greengrass Running Water is there are 3 stories going on simultaneously, and there are more than 3 voices going on. So Coyote, the deity in lots of different native mythologies, is one of the narrators, and he talks like you would imagine a dog would talk, right? It's a little bit happy, a little bit childlike, and those are my favorite. Like those sections crack me up. And we're telling a creation story in little segments in here, but then the full arc of the story, the novel, is also a creation story. Each character, each narrator has its own voice. I mean, look at this. Like, I wrote all over this, and it's also so full of metaphor that takes a lot of time to understand. So again, not an easy book to read, but definitely worth reading to become a better writer. I hope that was helpful. I didn't delve into quite as much what is most effective about these books, because I wanted to cover a lot of ground about the writing in these books, because I wanted to cover a lot of ground, different places, different ways that you can learn just from reading how to be a better writer. Something that I'm still struggling with. You know, I can steal language if I try, but I personally struggle with subtext. It is something, though, that, like, when you study just the things that you're reading, maybe for pleasure, if you just give them a harder, closer look, you can see where they're effective, and if you can underline that, if you can put an asterisk there, if you can find the moment where something happens, then you can steal it. I would, let's see, is there anything I didn't mention? I've got notes here. I would love your feedback. I would love for you to comment and share, of course. Check out our website, check out our other social media accounts. But I want to know what you want to hear. I want to know what you want to hear about writing, about reading, about being an artist in this world, so that these videos are for you. They, excuse me, these videos are not for me. I'm hoping to help my writing community come together. I'm hoping to teach what you want to learn, or get better experts on who can do that. So let us know. Throw us a message on social media or an email, or give us some comments so that we know how to better serve you. I have had an awkward and fun time today. I can't see the screen that says I'm recording, but I feel like we are all ready to move on and write more light into our lives. See you next Tuesday at 1 p.m. Central Time.